Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Well, today we welcome back Maddie Greenspan, who's been on the show in the past talking all things crypto, eToro and whatnot. And we're going to be diving into one of the most hotly debated topics around the globe, which is Zionism, anti-Semitism, Judaism. What are the differences? What's unfolding in Gaza? Some historical stuff. And Maddie, why don't you start and talk about maybe your background and how you identify and maybe the differences between Judaism, being Jewish, Zionism, and these things that are hotly debated at the moment.
Absolutely. And I first of all, I want to say thank you for hosting this, Alex. It's, from the bottom of my heart, seeing so much anti-Semitism online and in real life lately. I mean, it's something that I've had to deal with being Jewish since I was a kid, but it's certainly amplified 10x, if not 100x, over the last couple of years. And a lot of the time when I see that kind of stuff from people that I know or that I've had interactions with in the past, I'll generally just send them a DM and say, hey, look, I stopped following you because I've seen, anti-Semitism propaganda or misinformation. Usually the response is fuck off, kike. So I want to say thank you to you for opening up a dialogue. Whether or not you believe or whatever, there's just so much on the internet. People always want to be right, you know? And I think that it's a lot more than being right. I think it's a lot more important to learn from each other and to learn our differences of opinion. So thank you for that.
No, that's all right. And as I've said when we were chatting, there's plenty of what we're seeing now. There's plenty of Jewish people that are coming out and speaking out against Zionism, or even within Israel, there's mass protests against maybe what the Israeli government are doing. So it's just like when people criticize Australia, it doesn't mean they don't like Australians. It's just they're against the sort of government or the radical people in charge. So I want to drill down into all this today. But sort of what are you seeing, and what do you think is untrue, or the sort of the myths you want to dispel?
Sure. So the number one thing, if you say the word Zionism and you call me a Zionist, I take it as a compliment. Um, the word Zionist, if you look it up in the dictionary on Google, it basically means somebody who believes that Jewish people have the right to settle and live in their ancestral homeland, which is Israel. That's not just Jewish people. So that actually, and particularly historically, if you ask anybody in the world, where do Jewish people come from? I mean, the answer generally is Israel. We have evidence of such, not only historic and biblical, but archaeological, liturgical. Just go anywhere in Israel. I mean, there's a grave site in the city of Sfat where there are famous Jewish rabbis buried there from all eras of history, spanning back the last 2,000 years. So we feel deeply connected to the land, and we generally tolerate other people on the land as well. 20% of Israeli citizens are Arabic, both Christian and Muslim, and they have equal rights. And many of them are Zionists as well. And some of them, unfortunately, are Islamists who believe that the entire world needs to be Islamic, and that there should be an Islamic caliphate, and that if people are unwilling to convert to Islam, they should be killed. That's happening all across Africa at the moment. It's happening in Syria. Very recently, there was a Druze population that had been absolutely obliterated and humiliated. You're talking about like saying "bark like a dog" and then shooting them off of a building with a gun, and that's very sad when it happens to anybody. Um, it happened to us on October 7th in a massive scale, which I think that a lot of people are not privy to what happened there, even though Hamas and the terrorists filmed it with their own cameras and broadcast it to the world. I think still people don't understand, or they think that we're lying, or they just don't get it. But if you live in Israel and you speak Hebrew, I mean, you've already either know somebody who's been affected directly, or have seen hundreds and hundreds of people, eyewitness news, and the like. And what happened on that day was absolutely horrific. And we have a responsibility, both to ourselves, to our children, and to the rest of the world, to ensure that that never happens again. And so that's what's happening right now, is that we are cleaning that up.
Let's dive into. I want to dive into the October 7th stuff as well, specifically. But as someone that's pretty into crypto, I guess, is it fair to say, Matty, that you're kind of against the bankers and you know the evil of central banking and all that sort of stuff? So you're familiar that like Israel was set up in 1948 by the Rothschilds and by the bankers after World War II. So how do you feel about like that connection, that it was actually started by one of these evil banking families?
Right. So that's your premise that I disagree with, is that it wasn't an evil banking family.
Okay.
A lot of so definitely the Rothschilds were a prominent banking family in that era. And I've been to the Rothschild Bank in Switzerland once. It was quite an experience. Some very, very smart people, and financial geniuses, to be honest. But there is absolutely zero evidence of them being an evil family. A lot of the stuff that they're credited with is just baseless allegations that are deeply rooted in anti-Semitism. So if you have some evidence of them being evil, I'm happy to examine it. And I have on dozens of occasions before when people bring that sort of stuff to me, but always found out that it's just baseless.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we can get into the deep dive into the history of the Rothschilds and where that name even comes from, Red Shield and all the connections. But I think most people would agree that just banking families in history in general are kind of greedy, and they've accumulated the world's wealth through interest. And you can, dive into the word usury and stuff. It's a way to extract wealth from, and this is where individuals, companies, and governments are now all in debt to these central banks. I don't think how anyone could really, say that in any way bankers are, I think you said that's super intelligent or whatever. I think it's a pretty easy business model to take interest off everyone else while they do all the work and you just get super wealthy. I don't think how anyone would push back against the fact that that in itself is bad, if not evil.
You're absolutely right, and that is a firm belief of mine, and actually a firm belief of Judaism. One of the 613 commandments in the Torah is the prohibition of taking interest or giving interest. Both are actually prohibited by Jewish law, but it happens anyways. And I remember having, when I was young, because this is something I've always felt passionate about, with a rabbi and saying, "Hey, look, how can I open up a bank account in Israel when they're going to be charging me interest or giving me interest on my surplus?" And his answer was, "Look, you just don't have a choice, right? I mean, that is the way that banking institutions are set up these days. And there are commandments of the 613 commandments that are easier to keep, and there are ones that are harder to keep, and there are ones that are impossible to keep. And therefore, we always, as a Jew, we always have to make sure that we learn and understand the world around us and the commandments, and always make sure that we're doing right by God and by our fellow man."
Mm-hmm.
And that's the number one thing that we have. That's not to say that there haven't been Jewish people who've done absolutely evil things. And that's unfortunate. But you have to not confuse the religion and a rabbi told me, don't confuse your R's and R's or your J's and J's. Don't confuse rabbis with religion or Jews with Judaism, because we're all humans and we all have a good inclination and a bad inclination, and sometimes people follow the bad inclination.
Do you want to maybe define the differences then? Because we hear these terms like the Torah and Judaism, and then there's more radical beliefs like the Talmud and certain rabbis, and all the way through to Kabbalah and mysticism. So do you want to maybe define those for people and acknowledge that they do exist, or who believes them, and what's the difference?
Absolutely. That's an excellent question. So we actually have two Torahs. So there is the written Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, and the oral Torah, which are all of the other things that you mentioned. So the Talmud, Kabbalah, and Hasidism, the mysticism. That's the stuff that I absolutely spend a lot of time on my daily studies, and the Talmud, of course, and both the oral tradition and the written one were given to Moses on when he was up there for 40 days and 40 nights. When he received the Torah, he wrote down the written Torah, and he received the oral Torah in its entirety, and then handed it down to the people around him orally. Religion is like a blockchain. Okay, so it is handed down from generation to generation. Some of the things are written, and that's we can compare a Torah scroll from any region on earth that has been handed down from generation to generation, copied letter for letter. Even Ashkenazic or Sephardic Torah scrolls have almost no differences whatsoever, maybe spacing or line spacing. Even the Samaritan Torah scroll has maybe a few minor changes that were detailed. So it's when you're dealing with the written, it's very easy to verify that it is authentic and that this is what was handed down from Moses. And when you're dealing with the oral stuff, it gets a lot more difficult to verify where it came from or what's being said, and it's certainly more open for interpretation and personal understanding than the written Torah. But we believe that both of them are absolutely word of God.
And so when you say oral, they've now been obviously scribed into texts, which people can read and study and so on.
Yes, right. So initially they were handed down from Moses orally, and over time there were different rabbis that, for whatever reason, maybe dwindling Jewish population or external force that threatened to extinguish the light, decided to write them down. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi very famously compiled the Mishnah, which was the first kind of version of the oral Torah that had ever been written down. People were like, "You're not supposed to write that down." He's like, "Look, I have to." And then the Talmud, which is written about the Mishnah, actually is basically rabbis studying the Mishnah and then arguing about its meaning. So one rabbi says this, another rabbi says that. Anybody who studies the Talmud heavily, it usually comes with a disclaimer. Just because it's written in here doesn't mean it's law. And we don't decide law based on what's written in the Talmud. Rather, the law is generally written and iconicized in a later version, which is called the Shulchan Aruch, which is much more straightforward and much more accessible and understandable without vagueness or ways of interpretation.
I think a lot of people would disagree that these religious texts are like a blockchain, in that, look at the religions and there's literally thousands of different versions of each individual religion, and they've all changes and so on. So this is one thing I think a lot of people find.
Christianity is a hard fork of Judaism. I think that most people would kind of agree with that, right? It's a different religion. It's being sustained by completely different people. It did fork off of Judaism at some point. And then Islam would then be a hard fork of Christianity, right? They said, okay, there was the Jews, and then there was the Christians, and those people don't know what the heck they're talking about. And then came Muhammad and clarified everything for us. So that's how I see it, as really like a blockchain. But the original chain, still exists in its, in its purity, for lack of a better term.
So what do you think about some of these more radical things that come up in the Talmud when these rabbis are debating, and things like Jesus is burning in excrement, or it's okay to do these crazy sick acts to little kids, or that all non-Jews are these terms we get thrown around, goyim and edom and all this sort of stuff. So How do you view all that when this is coming out?
Yeah, it's a good question and very valid. And a lot of the time, those type of things are mistranslated. So the term goyim has 5 different translations. So you might say, okay, here it meant specifically the Romans, right? And because that's who the goyim were at the time, the term actually in a literal translation means nations, and therefore it's quite loose and depending on context can mean different things. Jesus boiling an excrement, I don't know. I suppose one rabbi said it at the time. I don't really believe that. I mean, I believe that Jesus did the best he could with what he had and certainly had good intentions. I don't believe that he was the correct Messiah, because I believe that the Messiah that is the true ultimate Messiah, and there is a Messiah in every generation, but the true ultimate Messiah that's going to bring about the end of days that we believe is in the prophecy will bring about peace on earth. And that's what we're really hoping for. And clearly, that hasn't happened yet. But I don't view Christianity personally as idol worship. Certainly there might be some who do. But that's part of the different interpretations.
So what about if we get into that then, the Noahide laws, and they say, as you mentioned, idol worship is anyone that's not worshipping the true God of Judaism and that type of thing. So doesn't that conflict with what you've just said, that Christianity is okay when it actually names that worshipping Jesus is not the true God, and that's not okay, and it's punishable by death and beheading?
Yeah, again, I don't view Christianity as idol worship. You're still looking at God. I mean, you're not worshiping a piece of wood. The idol worship that is talked about biblically is generally like Baal, for example, who, like, literally the way people would worship him would be to, like, poop in front of the statue, and like it just weird stuff. And so I mean, I'm a very live and let live type of person. I definitely don't want to condemn anyone, let alone, an entire nation, unless they've done something truly evil. And therefore, I don't personally interpret it that way. And there are certainly many rabbis who don't personally interpret it that way. And I think that it's a discussion that's worth having. But I think that that's, over focusing on a literal translation of the Noahide laws. I think that some of the other ones are extremely, kind of common sense. Don't murder, don't steal, don't eat a limb of a living animal, right? And and the Noahide laws are generally uh, a way for everybody who wants to, worship God and be a good person, to kind of come into that way, and not having to convert to Judaism, where you're going to be then confronted with 613 laws, which are a lot more complicated and a lot more onerous and a lot more difficult to fulfill.
Yeah, and I was reading that the Noahide laws are actually brought into law in America by George H.W. Bush in '91 as well. And are you familiar with all this?
No,
Yeah, yeah. So it was.
no, yeah, I'm happy to hear.
So I think there was this famous clip of Rabbi Schneerson, and he's talking to Netanyahu about getting things moving and it's not happening fast enough. And it was Rabbi Schneerson, after he died, I think it was on his birthday, they brought in this education day around this Noahide stuff, and then they actually brought into law on his birthday. And I think that scares a lot of people, that these Noahide laws, which depending, and again, if you're being more lenient and saying you don't have a problem with Christianity, that's fine. But what if someone in power is more radical, and now it's literally in the law that if you're not worshipping having these beliefs, it's punishable by death? Like, that's pretty scary stuff being written into US law.
Yeah, I literally, the punishable by death stuff in Judaism. I mean, that never happens. I mean, very, like, once in 1,000 years, if that, right? Those law, like, and there's for example, um there's one law or passage that says if a son is rebellious, then the father should take him to the village council, and the village council will put him to death, right? And so, and I have one friend who went off on this. He's like, "That's what it says in the Torah. I can't believe it. What an evil religion. I can't get on board with this." You have to read between the lines, right? Is a son is rebellious, the father should take him to the council, and the council should put him to death. Now, if the father would put him to death, that would be obviously a very big problem. The father is executing judgment on his own son. But what village council is going to put a child to death? Understand that it's a very high bar. And same thing for the laws of the Sabbath. If somebody was caught breaking the laws of the Sabbath, he needs to be put to death. But the circumstance that needs to happen in order for that to happen, there need to be two separate witnesses who are not brothers or siblings or blood related, having to warn the person about this specific action separately, not knowing of each other, and then two other people who saw him do it and who are also able to corroborate but haven't spoken with each other. It's like the circumstances of it happening are just impossible. And so I believe that God is holding this kind of threat of death over our heads so that we take it seriously, or so that we can learn something from it. But it never actually occurs. And therefore, I don't believe that it should be, I think if the American justice system was putting people to death for being Christian, I think that the world would be a very sad and sorry place. I don't think there's any rabbi in the world who would get on board with that. Don't know if I can say the same for, kind of other religions who absolutely do like that kind of thing and are kind of into that forced conversion or death penalty over over women showing their hair or stuff like that. It's not who we are as a people, and we certainly never force ourselves or our religion on anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things most people would agree to is that white, traditionally European, traditionally Christian nations seem to be the ones that are most under attack, being flooded with migrants. And these migrants aren't choosing to come here. Often it's their countries that are getting bombed and in the middle of war, often with Israel. And then, again, there's not this mass migration into China or into India or these other places. It's these white, traditionally European Christian nations which are all been flooded with these migrants. And so it seems like sort of there is an attack on Christianity or white people, those traditional values. Like, wouldn't you agree with that? And the leaders of all these countries seem to stand with Israel in every decision.
I would push back on, because of wars with Israel. Israel has not caused any major war-related immigration, I mean, with the exception of Gaza, which is 2 million people. And we would love for them to have the option to flee the war like every other war-torn country. At least the innocent would have an option to get out, and we would be able to target the guilty. But, in this case, the guilty really enjoy having the innocent around them so that they can make us look bad. But Syria or Sudan or, the Congo, those are the countries that have caused this migration, and that really had nothing to do with us. And if you look at the numbers of these things, I really encourage the numbers, because that really tells a different story than what you're going to see on your social media feed.
Well, in Australia, for example, we're just getting another huge tens of thousands of Afghanis and that. So some of it is coming from these affected regions. But
again, Afghanistan has nothing to do with.
I want to rewind a bit, maybe, and we'll get into the war in the Middle East and 9/11. But I think when Israel was set up and you first get that plot of land in the place known as in Palestine at the time, and there's this talk about the Greater Israel Plan and expansion, and now if you look at a map, it's clearly kind of what has happened. And then even Netanyahu came out yesterday and openly spoke about Greater Israel Plan, and you see the Greater Israel map on the patch of the IDF soldiers and that sort of thing, where I think it is it written in scripture that Israel believed that they'll control from river to river in that region?
No, Not entirely. The Greater Israel plan is not something that any Jewish person would ever say or talk about. It's not something that we think about. It is something that I have seen only in the context of anti-Semitism and framing it in this way. Obviously, expanding our borders, can be a good thing under certain circumstances. We don't want to displace anybody if we don't have to. I'll give you an example of that. Right when after the 68 war or the 6 Day War, we conquered the entire Sinai Peninsula, which is a land twice the size of Israel in and of itself. So Israel was 3 times the size once we conquered it. We then gave that land back to Egypt in exchange for a peace treaty. And on that day, that same day that the peace treaty was signed, there were 2 cities in the territory and the line that was drawn on the Sinai Peninsula that were Israeli cities. And the Egyptians said, hey, you've got 2 weeks to vacate. You're no longer welcome here. And they essentially ethnically cleansed the Jewish people from that land. We never did that, like ever. When we conquered Israel after the 1948 war, the Arabs, many of the Arabs, they call it the Nakba, but the Nakba is a lie. The Nakba is basically the result of the Arab countries saying to the Arabs in the region, please leave. We're about to attack Israel. And once we attack and conquer, you can come back and you can sell your houses. They then lost the war. And so the Arabs who actually stayed there and didn't listen to the other nations, they remained and received citizenship. They weren't kicked out. They weren't ethnically cleansed. And we've never actually done that. Gaza itself was joint control between Egypt and Israel. And in 2005, we basically pulled out completely from the Gaza Strip in hopes for peace. Literally saying, okay, uprooted many Jewish communities. Even the gravestones were uprooted and taken away, and we even left them several greenhouses so that they could start an economy. 2 years later, there was a civil war in Gaza between the radicals and the leftists. The radicals won, and ever since we've been in defensive mode as far as that piece of land is concerned. So yeah, no, we're not. Look, if what's happening in Syria now is a very interesting case study because the Syrian regime has fallen. And clearly the lines of Syria are going to be redrawn. We may take a sliver of it, the lands that would make our position more defensible against future attacks like the one that's been happening over the last 2 years from the north, from both Lebanon and Syria and Iraq onto Israel. But actually, if you talk to most Israelis, we're more interested in seeing a Druze nation arise, because those people deserve self-sovereignty. They've been in that region for a very long time, and they are being persecuted by the Islamists who are currently in power in Syria. So for us to see a Druze nation would be absolutely a dream come true. I've personally cried over their plight, what's happening right now to them, and the fact that Israel dropped in Druze special forces or Druze Israeli citizens to go and defend them. I'm very proud of my country for that.
I think one thing that people would sort of push back on is that, we see these statements coming out of the US that were famously made about how, we're going to go to war with 7 countries in 7 years in the Middle East. And Netanyahu even sort of predicted and spoke about 9/11 and talking about Saddam being so close to weapons of mass destruction to Congress and all these things that just turn out to be false time and time again. And then you see who suffers and who benefits, and it's all come out now that it's the CIA and giving weapons to these groups and funding these radical groups to cause these uprisings, which causes the chaos, which then gives the excuse to come in and say, oh, we're just doing self-defense. And it's just, as you said, oh, you get a slither of land, and it wasn't the plan to take over or, conquer, as you say. But now it's like, oh, we're going to slither of this. And they're currently, bombing 5 different countries and just in self-defense. And it seems to be a pretty clear pattern here of everyone else is the bad guys. Israel's always expanding. The casualties, like in Gaza, for example.
But I just explained to you that we gave up the Sinai Peninsula. So that's not expansion. That's a contraction.
Well, that might be one example, but
a huge one, right? I mean, look at the map. The Sinai Peninsula is 2 times the size. Our goal was expansion. Why would we ever do that? If our goal was expansion, why would we pull out of Gaza? Our goal as Jewish people and as Israelis is to always do what's right by God and by our fellow man.
But that might be a temporary example, as you say. You pulled back out of Gaza in 2005, you said.
Yeah.
But look at it now, and you look at the map, and it's just basically Israel's taken over all of Palestine, and now it's basically cleared out. All of Gaza is now completely flattened and leveled, demolished. But don't you agree that this is one of the most craziest things we've seen in human history?
Well, the most crazy, no. Like I said, I mentioned the Druze, but we can also look at what's happening in Yemen, where millions of people are starving to death at the moment, and they've got mass famine over there. You can look at the Syrian civil war, where 10 times the amount of people have been killed, more than 500,000 deaths in the Syrian civil war. We can look at what's happening in the Congo or in Sudan or in Darfur. I mean, there are very, very bad things happening all over the world. And so a lot of people hyper-focus on what's happening in Israel because there's a lot of propaganda. There's a lot of money making sure that that's what's crossing your feed all the time, and misframing it. Because literally the people that we are fighting, obviously, I mean, there are innocent people who are suffering in Gaza. I'm not ever going to downplay that. And it sucks for them. And a lot of them never wanted Hamas there. And I cry for them. But on the other hand, the people that we're fighting in Gaza, in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Iran, in 7 different nations, these are Islamists. These are the people who want to wipe us off the map, who tried to wipe us off the map on October 7th and committed horrendous crimes against humanity. And they're the ones who, if we give them half a chance, will finish the job. And therefore, we're in an existential war here. We don't really have a choice but to win, and win completely, because we know that if this ends in some sort of a peace treaty, it's just going to be broken as soon as they have the strength again. And we don't want that. And we will continue to fight until that threat is destroyed.
When you say it's blown out of proportion by the media, do you agree that we know the concentration of power, who owns the media and these companies and the social media, and a lot of the time these people, these companies now are owned by Zionists, particularly the media and that type of thing. So when you say propaganda, most of the people that own all the media are Zionists, and I would argue they're doing anything they can to stamp this out. And the hashtag Free Palestine gets banned from TikTok, and all the videos showing what's happening are the ones that are being generally taken down, and you're not allowed to talk about that side of the story. And all the politicians and Zionists are saying we stand with Israel. So I'm not sure how you can say it's kind of like all the money and propaganda is pushing it when it's clearly the other side that has the media and has your back.
Alex, do you think that if there was policies about these things on Facebook or Twitter or TikTok, saying that Free Palestine hashtag or any do you think that you would ever see it?
Well, it was literally got taken down on TikTok.
I don't know what happened on TikTok. I'm not sure about the incident that you're referring to. But the algorithms are sophisticated enough that if there was any sort of policy from those companies, I don't know who controls those companies. I don't know what you're referring to. I don't think that that's correct, but I don't even want to go there. I want to say right now, we can look at it and research it, but I want to say that if there was that policy, you would never see anything about Palestine. You wouldn't. It wouldn't be there. So the argument right there should be kaput.
So what do you think about like last week when we had the entire Al Jazeera news team all killed? Or when we see the and I think in the pre-interview we spoke about the death toll being, a few thousand Israelis and a few 100,000, and you said the numbers don't represent the crime or however you frame that. But I think, can't you see everyone else's point that there's literally 100 times more death happening on one side, and we're seeing all these kids and women in hospitals, and it's always just, it's Hamas. And it's Gaza's now leveled, and you can say, it's Hamas, but you keep, how does that, it's 100 times worse. I'm just not sure how you can make that position defensible.
What do you mean? Are you saying that right and wrong should be determined by body count? Is that kind of your argument here?
Well, I
don't believe that.
You have to at least acknowledge when there's hundreds of thousands of women and children dying that you can't just keep saying, it's Hamas.
No, there haven't been hundreds of thousands of women and children dying. That's absolutely false. Even by Hamas's own figures, and Hamas is the terrorist organization, there have been approximately 60,000 people killed. And Hamas statistics do not differentiate between combatants and non-combatants, which means that we don't know how many people of Hamas were killed versus how many innocent civilians. Hamas fighters fight in civilian clothing, and when they die, they're reported in the total figure. And therefore, the statistics are very difficult, but you just said hundreds of thousands, and absolutely, it's absolutely untrue. There's been 60,000 deaths. And I'll give you one more thing, because people like to throw the word genocide around, which genocide is a horrible word to use for this situation, because there have been 90,000 births in Gaza since the war started. And so what's happening in Gaza is a war. The IDF, and I know many IDF soldiers, my brother-in-law is an IDF soldier, and many of my friends from high school. And they're some of the nicest people on earth, by the way. And they go through, and there's ample evidence to show that they go through the biggest caution to avoid civilian casualties at all costs, and in many cases are pulling punches in order to minimize the death toll of civilians. They tend to drop leaflets letting people know where they're about to attack. What army does that? What army drops leaflets and says, "Hey, we're about to attack here"? They invented a tactic called knock on the roof, which basically sends a small munition on top of a building before it's demolished. They know that there's weapons in that building, and they say, "Hey, everybody, we're about to destroy this building. Get out." Which is why you have cameras pointed at buildings that are about to be demolished, because they know where they're about to strike. And just looking at the devastation, I mean, just run the numbers, with 75% of the structures destroyed. If we were trying to kill people, if we were trying to maximize the death toll, I mean, don't you think it would be a lot higher than 60,000? So you got to have to kind of apply critical thinking. And that's why the Israel-Palestine conflict, to me, is really a litmus test for who is able to do their research without having their emotions get involved, because the propaganda is absolutely aimed at your heartstrings. A little kid on fire, a starving child on the cover of the New York Times. And the New York Times then was completely lambasted because that child had cerebral palsy. He wasn't starving at all. The BBC just announced that a woman was flown to Italy and died of malnutrition. She actually had leukemia. It was found out like within hours. And the BBC headline runs with, she died of starvation from Israel. So you got to apply critical thinking and research these things quite thoroughly. And when you do, you'll find a completely different story than what you're seeing on your feed.
Yeah, well, I do want to move on. I don't get bogged down, but I think we could easily find out that with the number of people displaced and beyond below the rubble, that hasn't been cleared, that the death toll is going to end up being far, far higher. But let's talk a bit more about October 7th, because at the time, Israel has the most sophisticated technology and defense systems and all this stuff that we know about that they often have spoken about. And so when we have these borders and the fence that gets broken on October 7th by Hamas, people started to question, well, how does the most guarded bit of territory and border in the world, with all these motion detectors and all these patrols and tanks, and then there's just a group of people that can somehow get through? And you weren't allowed to say that. That was a conspiracy theory. And now we've even got IDF soldiers and Israeli officials coming out and talking about how they stood down and allowed this to happen.
Yeah, it's extremely sad, and I have trouble talking about October 7th. Stuff that happened on that day was absolutely beyond the pale. I really don't want to go into specifics, but literally, imagine people's worst nightmares. People being, children tortured in front of their parents, and parents being tortured in front of their children, and a lot worse. And you're right. There clearly was, and it was known within Israel quite immediately, that there was clearly something from the army or from some generals in the army that kind of knew something was coming. I have trouble believing that they knew what was coming, right? That they might have thought, okay, well, maybe it's going to be something small, and we'll use that for our political gain. So you have to understand the political landscape of what was happening in Israel on October 6th and the months prior. And I think that actually kind of led to October 7th attack. Maybe indirectly, but that was what gave them the signal of the timing. The left and the right wings of Israel, so the people who are completely pro-peace and against Bibi Netanyahu, versus the people who are more into self-defense and strict laws and maybe more religious. There was just a huge political divide, and it was ripping the country apart. Tel Aviv, which is the center of the left, pretty much the entire city was being shut down on a weekly basis. The Ayalon Highway flooded with people, anti-government protests. And so about 1 month before October 7th, there was an incident where about 30 pilots walked out of the army, and they publicly announced that we're not part of the army anymore because we don't like the government and what they're doing. And Bibi Netanyahu got up and said, "What the hell are you doing? Our enemies are watching. Are you freaking kidding?" And eventually they came back to the army, but very clearly there were factions within the army, and most likely generals or whatnot, that wanted the government out, and probably thought that, well, and this is my opinion. I mean, obviously there's no way to know what actually happened there. What we do know is there's no way they could have gotten through without some help from the inside. And my assessment is somebody wanted to frame this on Bibi and say, okay, look what happened under his watch, and let's get him out of office. And therefore was just either not passing information correctly, or even specifically sabotaging the country. And those things happen, and it sucks. And the result of that was catastrophic. And I don't, there isn't much more I can say about it, but that it's really bad. And I don't.
Yeah, I think this is the problem that people have, that this line, and I think even you said it before, that what happened on October 7th was horrible, and it's kind of been used as the justification for all this killing and spreading out and expansion ever since. But then it comes out that it was actually an inside job.
Yeah, well, expansion, I wouldn't say that hasn't really happened.
Well, displacement at the very least of the Palestinian people, if you don't want to call it expansion.
Yeah, but why would anybody want that?
Well, this is the question. Why would you allow it to happen? And it is being used as the excuse. And now they're talking about there's no such thing as a two-state solution.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, right. And so what I'm telling you is that there was a divide in the army. There was a divide among the population. And therefore, I have trouble believing that anybody would do that intentionally in order to displace population. Now, whether or not they were let in by an Israeli commander does not shift the blame for what happened. The people who committed the crime are the people who committed the crime. That's like saying, oh, well, I left my alarm off one night and I knew that somebody might come in, and therefore the person who, came in and ransacked my house and did horrible things to my family, they're innocent. We don't have to take care of them or punish them.
Yeah, but
you
I
see what I'm
think
saying here?
in that example, I don't think that is the equivalent. The equivalent would be if we acknowledge that Hamas have been funded by Israel and the CIA and stuff. So it would be the equivalent of me giving the criminal weapons and then telling them it's organized, telling them what day I'm going to leave my alarm off, allowing them to attack me, and then going out and attacking them and all their suburb for the next year or two. And when I organized it all and allowed it all to happen, it's not self-defense.
Well, it absolutely is, because there's the criminals who walked in, and there are the other people who got hurt, right? Again, with most of what you've been saying today and the accusations that you've been hurling, there is zero evidence. And so you're coming to say that, okay, it was Israel who completely framed this. And again, I don't see why anybody would. So the why is very important here, the motivation.
Just to be clear, I'm not saying this. I'm just repeating what the Israeli soldiers and IDFs and officials have come out and said on public record, that they allowed this to happen.
Well, somebody did. That could have been one general. That doesn't mean the entire Israeli population is now guilty for what happened, what Hamas did. So Hamas is responsible for what they did, and they will pay a heavy price. There had been several Israeli officials who've resigned over what happened on October 7th. I don't think that justice has been served there. I don't think that the investigations have been concluded against, internally about what's happened. And so what are you trying to say? So we shouldn't eradicate the people who are trying to kill us and who've been, killing innocent civilians for the last 20 years. We shouldn't try to eliminate them because maybe there was a general who allowed it to happen. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think we need to acknowledge that none of this would be possible if there wasn't for the corrupt general, who I think you're saying you would agree that they are a bad person and that should not have been allowed to happen. And so none of this is possible without the people on the Israeli side.
No. That's not what I'm saying. It wouldn't have been as successful. It would have happened anyways. They have tunnels, they have gliders. They have been preparing for this moment for 20 years.
Okay.
They have rockets, they have RPGs, they have all of these weapons that have been provided by Iran and Qatar funding. They've been preparing for so I think that the timing of it, with the IDF being at an all-time low as far as readiness and having distractions on the political side, was ideal for the terrorists. And if, there was a general who, so to speak, handed them the keys and gave them the combination code, that made their attack more successful.
Yeah, okay.
But it didn't cause it.
Well, I think when we start to see this kind of pattern of whether it's that individual general or a small group of people that were bad and did the wrong thing and say allowed it to happen, people have started to go back throughout history and see these patterns of, the USS Liberty attack that's been covered in a lot of detail on podcasts this year. You're familiar with this, when Israel openly attacked the USS Liberty, even though it was flying an American flag, and tried to wipe them all out to drag America into war. And that's an awful lot like what happened, in 9/11. And then it's the excuse to drag America into this endless war in the Middle East and invade these 7 countries in 7 years.
So first of all, I want to clear the air about 9/11. I have seen a lot of propaganda saying that Israel or the Mossad had a role in that. There is absolutely zero evidence of that. All of the hijackers had Saudi passports and had zero connections to Israel. Osama bin Laden actually took credit for this. So I can't, in my wildest dreams, imagine how anybody wants to blame that on us, other than simply a modern day blood libel. The USS
Can I give you a
Liberty.
couple of examples that I think are hard evidence?
Okay.
So, what do you think about the famous dancing Israeli clips where there's a group of guys set up a camera and they're filming 9/11, and it's done the wide rounds on the news, and they
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that. I don't.
okay,
Um,
so they got caught by the FBI and held for weeks and weeks and weeks before one of the Zionist US cabinet.
I don't doubt it, Alex. I mean, that's not, when I was here in this room actually when 9/11 happened in California, and that was a black day for me and my family along with the rest of America. And in Israel as well, it was a very bad day. If there were some crazy Jewish people, I mean, there's 15 million Jews in the world, so if there were a few who danced, I don't know why they would do that. I know absolutely that in Gaza are films of people dancing and handing out sweets. It was on the news at the time that there was a public celebration on 9/11. Um, so I mean, you gotta
Well,
kind of look at.
these guys got arrested, and they're actually there having the camera set up before it happened, which shows
Okay, but does that mean that
foreknowledge.
they did it? I
Well,
mean,
they
does that
went
happen?
back to Israel. They got deported to Israel after being held by the FBI for weeks and got let off. And then they went on Israeli TV and said that they were there to document the event. They acknowledged it.
I have no idea about this event, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's not
Okay.
evidence that they
Well, I'll
perpetrated
send you
it.
that clip after we finish, but that is something that's very widely known in the sort of 9/11 truther movement, as well as the fact that there was Israeli art students working on floor 91 to 94, which is the floors that the plane hit, that were working on an art project for years that had access to the internal things. And there's photos of them with boxes and boxes of fuses doing an art project. Like that is just you can't think that all these things are just coincidences.
Yeah, if I mean, I have heard theories along the lines of, that the towers were blown up internally, and I have such a problem with like trying to comprehend how anybody would sneak that much explosives in and start setting them up in strategic places and nobody knew about it. So look, I mean, you gotta kind of take this thing, these, and I see that you spent a lot of time on this, um, but it's, there is actually zero evidence of this happening or um,
Do
this being
you do you
truth,
just in
as you put it.
general believe 9/11 was some sort of inside job? World Trade Center 7 also falls down perfectly in its own footprint, not even hit by a plane. The biggest, strongest towers in the world, still that
Yeah,
jet fuel can't melt steel beams, collapse on their own footprint.
yeah, it
Like, do you
can.
believe it's an inside job?
It can. It absolutely can. I believe that it was done by the people who said they did it, and the people whose, all the evidence points to.
So, moving on, I mean, I think um, another thing that people have a lot of trouble with is you hear things like we spoke about at the Talmud with the the pedo stuff and whatever, and you say it sort of depends on interpretation. Then you hear things like Israel is a haven for pedos, and people say, "Oh, that's not true." And then just this week we had, was it Thomas Alexandrovich, whatever his name is, close friend of Netanyahu, gets arrested in this pedophile sting, gets deported to Israel. So what do you say when you see things like that?
I think if he's guilty, he should be deported. I don't. Uh, Look, there are political loopholes that you can find, and people um, going to different places based on the laws of extradition or the laws in that place. Um, and the laws of Israel are specifically set up so that Jewish people have a safe haven that they can come and move to. And unfortunately, as with everything, like for example, Bitcoin is easier for criminals to use because of the anonymity. Both of us, I believe, agree that it's a force for good in the world, but sometimes criminals are going to use it. just by nature of the open source of what it is. And so the American justice system is designed to, let off offenders just so that there isn't a possibility that you accidentally incarcerate an innocent person. I think that if somebody's committed a crime, especially against young children, which is absolutely abominable, an abomination, then they should be brought to justice. And I believe that there have been closing of those loopholes over time, and that it should certainly be strengthened going forward. And I believe that most Israelis would absolutely agree with that without even a question.
And what do you say to people that kind of see a lot of this darker stuff happening, and they say, well, this all ties to the Black Cube, Saturn worship, Star of Ramphan, darker type stuff like that, when you see the rabbis with the Black Cube and this...
I'm not familiar with any of that stuff, to be honest. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm happy to learn more about it, but I mean, you have to understand, like, I'm 42 years old. I've been in this religion since birth, and I'm a human being on this planet. Do the best to put out good vibes in this world. I study Hasidism and Kabbalah and the Torah on a daily basis. Sometimes the Talmud as well, but it's not my favorite because it's more kind of dry. He said, she said stuff. But
that's right.
I've
that's too deep. That's fine. We don't have to get into it. But
I've never seen anything that even resembles like.
Well, why do the rabbis wear the black cube on their forehead then, in your understanding?
Black cube? You mean the fur hat?
No, the tiny little black leather cube that some of the rabbis wear.
Oh, I wear that too. It's called phylacteries. I do it every day. It's a leather box, which has parchment inside, which has inscribed on the parchment pieces of the Torah. It's a very spiritual experience. It's my morning meditation.
And so it doesn't have any like deep occult meaning or symbology necessarily, in your understanding. Is that kind of what you're saying?
It brings you closer to God.
Okay.
It's deep spiritual activity when you bind the leather on your arms and you pray to God for good in the world, for peace, for everything like that. If you can feel the connection. It's not something that I can really describe, but it's
that's
something
okay. That's cool. We don't have to get into that anymore. That's cool. Are you familiar with, again, one of the reasons people say JFK was assassinated is because Israel had taken the nukes out of America at that stage, and now we have a situation where Israel, it's pretty widely known they have nukes, but they haven't acknowledged it. Places like Iran and everywhere else have signed this treaty not to use nukes. Israel have refused to sign it, and Israel have this... is it the Samsung option, or where
I'll cut you off, Alex, but I know where you're going with this question. I'm going to go back to the USS Liberty because we haven't really resolved this.
And
I think that it bears resolving because of what happened on that day. The events of that day are clearly abnormal. Now, could it have been, a case of a mistake? It could have been, according to all eyewitness accounts. Could it have been malicious? Some accounts that I read said, okay, well, because they had information about Israelis genociding Egyptians. Now that to me didn't make any sense because clearly we were, killing people in the Sinai Desert who are military personnel and coming to kill us, and therefore, why would we ever care that that America knew about that as our ally? You're telling me maybe they did that to kind of drag America into the war? Well, it makes a bit more sense to me, to be honest, as far as like looking at it, as far as if we're delving into conspiracy theories already. We don't have any evidence of such, and that I think we have to treat it like that. But let's say it was true. Let's say, just for example, let's say for argument's sake, it was true. I think the Kennedy assassination, zero evidence, but well, let's say it was true. Let's say. Does that mean that we don't have a right to exist or that we don't have a right to settle in our homeland?
No, I think they're different talking points. I think the point I'm trying to get across is that with the recently declassified docs, it showed Israel and Mossad and that were named dozens of times in those documents as being involved. And then we hear these things coming out that JFK wanted to push back on the banks, dismantle the CIA, get this on top of this nuclear program. And it seems to be this pattern that there's always Israel kind of involved, whether you want to, yeah.
Well, the way that I understood the JFK files, and I mean, everybody's they're now open source, and everybody can delve into them for themselves. That Israel was mentioned in the context of that was another geopolitical thing that was happening at the time, but not in the context of anybody within the CIA credibly thought that Israel was involved in that or had committed it.
Yeah.
And so the JFK files are quite extensive, and they list everything that was geopolitical. Russia is mentioned far more times than Israel in those documents, like to the tune of 20 times more. And then people start hyper focusing on Israel because they're trying to latch onto a narrative. And for some reason, unbeknownst to me, people tend to have that, that kind of desire to find a villain or a scapegoat, which is why we've been persecuted in just about every country over the course of the last 2,000 years.
Well, we might get into that a little bit more. The next thing I want to touch on, though, is the whole Epstein stuff. So what do you make of this Epstein stuff? His partner in crime, Ghislaine Maxwell, her dad being pro-Israel, receiving a huge state funeral with all the Israeli higher-ups attending, and him being a Mossad double agent and all this type of stuff that's kind of come out now. What do you think?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't he dead before Ghislaine met Jeffrey?
I think he died a long time ago. I'm not sure if he was still alive. I think there are photos, maybe. But anyway,
Alex, people looking for a connection where there isn't any. If there, look again, I don't know. I wasn't there. I never met Jeffrey Epstein. Certainly, what he did was absolutely evil, and we know that. But I don't know. None of us have better information. But what I can say is that there is no public evidence of that. And then you throwing like the book at me on every single one of these things, like hundreds of different events where you assert that there might have been something, but there isn't really evidence, and we can't say conclusively. And many people say that, that this happened, or that these people are conspiracy theorists, and they say a lot of weird, wacky, crazy stuff. And you know what? It gets clicks. So why wouldn't they say they say that sort of stuff? And therefore, people, I think that, again, there's only 15 million of us in the world of 8 billion people. Our size is minuscule. And I think that a lot of people who are anti-Semitic, whether they know they're anti-Semitic or don't know that they're anti-Semitic, they never met a Jewish person and had a conversation like this. I think that that's really the crux of the matter. And that's why I really wanted to come here today and speak with you, because I feel like it's now my responsibility to stand up and say, look, I've been Jewish since birth. I study the Torah, the Talmud, the Kabbalah. There's absolutely nothing in there that's institutionally wrong. It's all about doing the right thing. Everything that I've learned and everything that I study is always do the right thing. There's a rabbi named Rabbi Hillel, and there's a famous story of a guy who walks into the study hall, not Rabbi Hillel, but Rabbi Shammai, who was at the same time as Rabbi Hillel. And he says to Rabbi Shammai, I'm standing on one foot. I want you to teach me the entire Torah with all the commentary, both the written Torah and the oral Torah, while I'm standing on one foot. And Rabbi Shammai took a stick and knocked his foot out from under him. And then the same guy went to Rabbi Hillel. He was persistent, and he said, hey, Rabbi Hillel, I want to learn the entire Torah, written and oral, with all the commentary while I'm standing on one foot. And Rabbi Hillel said to him, you want the entire Torah is that you should do unto others and treat other people as you wish to be treated yourself. And the rest is commentary.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
I get all that. I think one thing I would say, though, is that I don't think...
Are there bad people in the world? There absolutely are. Are there politicians in the world who do stuff for their own self-interest? Absolutely there are. And it sucks. Are there, and Jewish people, for whatever reason, whether it be nature or nurture, are undeniably a gifted people. And we have, if you look at the number of Jewish Nobel laureates compared to every other religion, it's way off the charts, even though we're such a small subset of the global population. And Jewish people who've invented huge breakthroughs throughout history in medicine and science and everything like that. And yeah, unfortunately, Sam Bankman-Fried and Alex Mashinsky were Jewish. So it means that we have that gift, and whether it's, we choose to use it for good or for evil is an individual choice.
Yeah.
And what it seems is that people tend to kind of villainize the entire religion and our entire nation, based on those.
I think this is
it's not justice.
I think this is kind of one of the maybe misconceptions of Jewish people when they say that most people are anti-Semitic without realizing it. See, I think most everyday Aussies, everyday Westerners in Europe don't even really know what the word anti-Semitism meant or what Judaism really is. People are just going about their lives struggling to get by, right? But when we start digging down these rabbit holes and starting to see these patterns, and then, the Epstein stuff comes out, global blackmail ring, Ghislaine Maxwell, her dad's a Mossad agent. You got the 9/11, USS Liberty. Now we've got October 7th. Oh, they allowed it to happen. There seems to be this pattern where people are going, doesn't matter what religion they are, whatever. There seems to be, this is a pattern of bad things happening where there's the same group of people connected. And you say that it's only 15 million or a small number of people and they work their way up. But I think you'd probably agree that it's our powerful institutions which have, whether it's banks or the media or Hollywood or politics, have kind of ruined the world. And it seems to be at the top of all these power structures, disproportionately, there's the same group of people. So do you agree with all that, or is it just a bad bunch of people from that religion, or how do you see all that?
Again, I mean, it's quite, that's how I see it, is the way that I've described it, that the religion itself, I mean, you can study, it's all open source, it's all online. There is nothing in our books or in Jewish tradition or anything, that would be even remotely evil. Don't steal. That's in the 10 Commandments. You're not allowed to do it.
But you've said that there are, but it's up for interpretation, because these texts, some of them do say that it's okay to do other things to non-Jews or to kids or whatever. And you say that's rabbis arguing over interpretations or whatever, but that is in some of these texts. So you can't deny it's there. You said it's up for interpretation.
Well, no, it's not up for interpretation. I mean, I think that it's being misinterpreted, not that it's up for interpretation. Do you get the difference? And I'm happy to delve into any one of those quotes, and we can. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read a page of the Talmud. I'll explain to you how it's structured. It's got, a block of text in the middle, sometimes a bit wider at the bottom, and then commentary on the side, commentary on the other side. And just reading like 2 or 3 lines, I mean, you need a rabbi to help you to understand what's written there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of weird stuff in there. I remember one when I was a kid, my friend was telling me about the stuff that's in there about rabbis having an argument over their dick size, and it's the same as, like, let's say, me and you were on a Twitter space and you're like, hey, that coin is pumping, I'm going to go mortgage my house. Right now, undoubtedly somebody hearing that in 100 years from now is going to misinterpret that. Right. He's going to think, oh, that guy was so fucking stupid. He was just, he might have, he doesn't know that I'm being sarcastic or joking, or that's just how we speak these days. And so every single one of those quotes, and I've gone through them. I mean, I remember somebody sending me like 12 of them at a time and just going through one by one and going, what's written here? And then uncovering that, no, it doesn't actually say that. No, it doesn't actually mean that, or there's a mistranslation, or actually it's not even there at all. And it's just somebody writing stuff that's blatantly false. And so I can absolutely, without a doubt, say that I've never come across something in the religion, even when when anti-Semites are throwing it at me intentionally to poke sticks, and then I go look into it, and then I go, no, actually, and then I'll explain it to the guy on Twitter, and then he'll block me and move on. But actually, when you start uncovering those pieces of the text, you're going to find that there isn't actually something inherently wrong. There is no way that there was a rabbi that was credible that promoted pedophilia. That's just, it's unfathomable.
Just on that point, though, don't rabbis, when they do the circumcision, suck the blood from the freshly circumcised child? Like, isn't that borderline pedophilia? Right there?
No, it's not done today. Not in any circumstance.
So when did that stop then? Because you still see these clips circulating all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not the right person to argue this specific point, because I know that there is a reason for this medically, or there has been a reason for this medically, and now it's no longer necessary. And people who want to do that, they might be purists or whatever. But I had, both of my sons circumcised, and no rabbi put their mouth on the dick. So there was like, people do weird things sometimes, and that's what, one thing that we do once a year, we twirl a chicken over our heads, and then we slaughter the chicken, and we feed it to poor people. So, like, there's a lot of weird stuff in there. But none of that actually points to a pattern of, evil or something like that. And if you're trying to look at that, I mean, there are 2 billion people in this world who practice another religion, which, absolutely are outrightly like saying, we're going to conquer Europe, and we're going to slaughter all of the infidels, and like overtly saying it. And like, you want to get in under our case for like nitpicky, like little places that you found that some rabbi might have said something once at one long time ago. Like, come on, guy. Like, look at the world around you. Look at what's happening. Look at the actual cause of these wars, which is, people trying to assert their dominance over other people, over other religions, and forcing that. And look at where, in what, like, have you ever heard a Jew like going and stabbing people and then screaming, Hashem is great, or blowing themselves up on a bus? It never happened. It's not us. It's not who we are. And there are other religions who do that. So I would just like appreciate if people can acknowledge that. And I'm not saying that all Muslims are bad. I do have a very good friend and co-founder who's Muslim, and he is part of the solution. He's actually out there saying, speaking against radical Muslims, and I love him to death. But there are plenty of Muslims in the world who would absolutely, slaughter you and your entire family in the most gruesome way just for being who you are. And they would laugh about it, and they would film it and show it to the world like they did to us. And, like, you want to come at the Jewish people, like, it's a bit weird, dude. It's a bit weird, and it's a bit strange. Because like you can study our books, you can study our religion, you can study what rabbis are saying, and none of them are saying, hey, we need to behead all the idol worshippers. Like,
but there are plenty of clips of that circling around with the older rabbis saying super radical things about goyim and stuff. And like we've already spoken about, that's an interpretation. You said during the government, that was the more radical faction, or that's a more radical general. So you keep saying like, there's no one that wants to do bad, but then there are clearly people, and I'm not arguing that there's not plenty of radical Muslims.
There was a rabbi that said that we should behead all the goyim?
There's clips of rabbis quoting passages of the Talmud that they believe that, and again, you said it's misinterpreted or whatever, but this is the things that they believe, that the goyim are here to service and that type of thing. There's so many clips.
I remember the clip that you're talking about, and you sent me a clip about a rabbi that was talking about tikkun olam, which means the fixing of the world. And this is like, it's very deep spiritual Kabbalah stuff. And the clip that you sent me was about 30 seconds. And generally speaking, that would have been like lesson 26 in a series of Kabbalah. And you know, it was certainly taken out of context. And what the rabbi was saying was that if we think about the original sin, I'm going to try to explain this in a minute or two. And it's very difficult. These are like very deep Kabbalistic and spiritual stuff. The sin of eating the apple, which is now why we're in the situation we're in. If that hadn't happened, we all would have been living in the Garden of Eden. And so there was then a subset of people who are Jewish and they have to keep 613 commandments in order to atone for that sin. And the rest of the world who are not Jewish and they should be keeping 7 laws in order to atone for that sin. And now tikkun olam, tikkun means fixing, olam means the world. So we're fixing the world and trying to fix what happened then. And once we get to that place where God is revealed, right? And I believe that over time, God becomes more and more revealed in this world ever since Mount Sinai until this day. Every single day, God is more and more revealed. I believe that the Trump assassination, for example, or attempted assassination, that was absolutely God pulling off of his mask for a moment to show the world, hey, I'm here, I exist, and I'm setting a course correction for the world. And I feel God more and more every day in my prayers. Even in the United States, where it used to be like a spiritual death for me to come here on my family vacations, I now feel like a lot more. Yeah. And what the rabbi was saying is that once we get to that place where God is revealed, then the people who are not Jewish will voluntarily say, hey, we see the God of Israel and we want to serve him too. What's the best way to do that? And this is tikkun olam. And the rabbi that probably wasn't explaining it correctly. And then it might sound like in that 30-second clip that he was talking about, well, all the goyim are going to be our slaves and we're going to subjugate them, right? It might, in the words that he used, it could be misinterpreted as that. But what I'm talking about, which is real tikkun olam, is actually what happened in the time of King Solomon. King Solomon was building the temple, and Jerusalem was the capital of the world. And all of the nations of the world were contributing resources towards the temple because they saw what was happening. They remembered the exodus of Egypt and the miracles that occurred there. And they wanted to pitch in and they wanted to help, and they also wanted to serve God. Mm-hmm. And I believe that is coming soon. I believe that it's coming very, very soon, where everybody is going to know God in his true form and without a question, and everybody will want to serve him of their own volition, and certainly not by force or subjugation.
So when you say God is coming, is in a physical, do you believe the Messiah is coming, or like what do you mean by that? Can you expand on that for people at home, or what is the Jewish Kabbalah Torah belief?
Yeah. Well, everything is God. Everything. In fact, what we see is around us, what looks like reality is actually God in disguise. It's a contraction of God, not an expansion, and not as much of a creation, but God withdrawing some of himself out of the space where we physically exist and creating a plane where we can interact with each other and interact with the world around us without knowing his presence. And there are ways to know his presence, not just through Judaism. I will say that, Buddhist monks, for example, when they achieve enlightenment or whatever, the God experience, I would say there are ways of attaining that without, not just the Jewish path, in my opinion. And so there's gradients, right, of revelation, of understanding that he's with us, and that this is the only world where it's actually possible to deny the presence of God. In the other worlds, and the other dimensions, it's clear that he's there. Angels don't have free will because they know that there's a God. And when you see God, you don't actually have free will because you have no choice but to serve him and but to do exactly what he says. And in this world, we actually have the opportunity to do good of our own volition, because we're able to deny his presence. And what he wants from us is to find him and then go ahead and serve him, both in, and he's actually laid out very, very clearly 613 rules for you, 7 rules for you. People who want to do the 613, who want to be Jewish, I mean, there is a path for that, and that is open to everybody. But if you come to a rabbi and say, "Hey, I want to be Jewish," their first response is going to be like, "You don't need to be Jewish. Like, don't worry. Like, you can be a good person. You can go to heaven. You can serve God without doing that." And for people like me who were born Jewish, if I was born un-Jewish, I don't think I would convert to Judaism. It's like I can't eat pork. I can't eat milk and meat together. I have to, I can't do all these. I can't light a fire on Saturday. Like all of these things, that these rules and that have been a yoke on me since childhood. And so what I've learned over the years is that it's not actually a yoke, but it brings me closer to my Creator, and that I start to do it with love and affection.
So yeah, just in wrapping up, I guess, Matty, how do you view? You said I can't remember your exact words about Jews being special and only 15 million, and you know lots of Nobel Prizes, or whether it's the Oscars, or they seem to be overly misrepresented in everything, politics, media, blah blah blah. So what do you
everything, science, discoveries, everything? Yeah.
Yeah, so
I don't know why.
What do you think about what are your beliefs or the general beliefs about God being God's chosen people and being different to others, or better than kind of thing, which I think is the thing that people take issue with.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that I'm better than anybody else, to be perfectly honest. And I don't think that most Jewish people think that either. As far as chosen is concerned, chosen for what, right? And the answer is we were chosen to fulfill the 613, whereas everybody else is fine with the 7. And, again, okay, that means that we're chosen. And the old Jewish joke is like, God, I understand that I'm chosen, but could you please choose somebody else for a bit? And so I do feel special now that I've read and I study and I understand the reasons for it. I do feel special. But I think that everybody is special, and everybody has the ability to, through their own service and through doing what's right and what the Lord wants, can also be special.
Yeah, I think the issue is that, like I said in the start of this episode, that there's so many different religions and people have issue with one set of books and texts that may or may not have been changed and may or may not be thousands of years old. What's to say the Australian Aboriginal people maybe 50,000 years ago that are the oldest, that said that they worship the rainbow serpent? Does the world have to all believe in their God kind of thing? Shouldn't everyone be able to believe in what they want or don't want, as long as everyone has the basic human, be kind to each other, don't kill? I think they're just sort of natural laws. I don't think you need a religion to teach you all this basic stuff.
You're right, and I think that that's correct. I think that it's correct thinking. I do believe that everybody should feel free to believe what they want to believe. And if there's one huge thing that I'm taking away from this conversation that I want to research further, is that idol worship is part of the 7 Noahide laws. I think that, I want to understand why and what does that mean exactly, because it's not something that I previously put much thought into. And clearly, if God did it, there's a reason. So I'd like to understand that a little bit better and to delve into it. But I believe that, everybody should be free to study and to believe what they want to believe. And so, yeah, there is something that I have to now examine.
Yeah. And who is the sort of do you see as the God of Israel or the Jewish people? Because a lot of people say, is it Lucifer, the bearer of light, in these different texts and whatever? So sort of how do you see all that? Who is the one true God and whatever? Yeah.
Yeah. So we believe, along with the Muslims, that there is only one God, and there is nothing else besides him. And therefore, the concept of a Satan who rebelled against God, it might have existed in theater, but there isn't. Angels don't have free will, as I mentioned, so they cannot do anything except for what God tells them to. And if there's nothing else besides God, that means everything in the world, good, bad, ugly, air, matter, all of it, you, me, existence, non-existence, black holes, everything is God. And what we're seeing is just is a construct, right? That he has created for us in order for us to go through this experiment of his, for lack of a better term, so that we can come close and that he can have a relationship with us. And the one question in Hasidism that there is left unanswered is like, it's comparing, like us wanting to have a relationship with a bug, right? Like, why would he want to have a relationship with us? Why would an infinite being want to have any sort of relationship with a non-infinite being? And that's like the unanswered question. We don't know. We don't know why he created us, or hopefully, when the revelation happens, Elijah the prophet can come back and explain it to us.
Yeah. I guess final question, Maddie, maybe on a little bit of a different track, but have you ever had any spiritual experiences with psychedelics, your mushrooms or ayahuasca or anything like that?
Absolutely. Love them.
And did you think that changed your thoughts on consciousness or your religion or God or anything like that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would say multiple experiences with psychedelics. Some of them extremely spiritual. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good stuff. Same here, but I think some of these tests show that a lot of people that have done them have either gone to a more neutral spiritual base and pulled away from structured religion and churches.
Really?
Yeah, so some of the results, and some people are completely changing their religion stuff. So it's always just something I find interesting to talk to people about their beliefs after they do these things.
I think it's personal, and I think that if you don't really believe in that to begin with, right, and you think that you believe in it, but there's something inside of you that's like says that there's some kind of mismatch of information, then those psychedelics are going to bring it out. For me, it made it stronger. It made it much stronger because it's something that I truly believe.
Yeah. Cool.
So that's how I feel about kind of inner consciousness, and it's a matter of faith, which is based on many years of study and personal experience. And I don't think that, I think that everybody has their own kind of path. And I also believe that everything happens for the good, and that everything not only happens for the good, but everything is good.
Yeah.
And when you see something that's bad or perceived as bad, it's actually good in disguise, because everything comes from God.
Yeah. Well, Maddie, I appreciate your time today. We've probably both learned a little bit off each other and maybe have to do it again in future. And I think one thing, again, I want to reiterate is that a lot of the time it's the people at the very top of all these organizations that are the evil, and people in the lower levels of whether it's business or religions or cults or whatever, sometimes none the wiser as to some of the inner workings. And that's why we do have to dig deep and have these conversations and all try to work out what is going on as the world seems to get weirder and weirder every day. But any final thoughts for people at home, Maddie?
Yeah, no, you're right. And there's a lot of temptation because, you know, doing bad inherently gives you positive reward, right? Going into a store and shoplifting, you come out with the merchandise, right? And that's very difficult for a lot of people to say no to. But that's in a sense why we're here. I think that people who understand that there's a higher power and that there are other worlds and what we do in this world affects the other worlds in a magnificent way, and understand that God is always watching them and loving them, would never do something like that for, some candy bar or whatever kind of merchandise you're going to pull out of a store.
Yeah.
And so I think that, that's, we have to understand that in every time, and I remind myself every time if I start to feel angry or something like that, I try to take myself out of the situation where I'm in personally right now and say, why is God making me feel like this at the moment? And how can I, what can I do that's going to improve the situation? And why is this good? And how can I make it, how can I make it better and more revealed?
Yeah, completely agree with that. As someone that's made plenty of mistakes over the years, you only can learn from them and become a better person and try and pass that on and I guess help everyone. So really appreciate your time today, Maddie, and I'll be interested to see
Thank
the
you.
comments below and maybe we can do a follow-up in future if or something like that. But yeah, thanks a lot, Maddie.
I can't understate the gratitude for you doing this, because again, there's just too many people out there who will just dismiss and not try and learn and say, well, I'm right and I know I'm right, and just I think that it's so much better when we explore and we discuss, and so thank you very much for that.
No problem. I hope you guys enjoyed that chat. We'll talk again soon. Cheers.